When did you notice that things weren't quite right or he was starting to feel unwell?
His pain was increasing. Pain management was what we needed. The first sort of indication that we should perhaps try Forest Home was all about pain management. Angels in nurses' uniforms is what I would say about the Forest Home staff. They were wonderful. They explained his symptoms. He had some different kind of pain relief on pumps and all sorts of things. But the kindness and the atmosphere in the place.
What would you say to someone else that may be fearful about going into a hospice or their loved ones might be scared? Welcome to the Life and Loss podcast, where we aim to normalise conversations about illness and grief, helping individuals feel less isolated through shared experiences. I'm delighted to be here today with Sarah, and in this interview, Sarah will share her experience of caring for her husband Steve and the transition from home to the exceptional support they received at Forest Holme Hospice. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you.
So I'd just like you to start by telling me a little bit about Steve, or Cloke as you affectionately call him. What was he like?
Cloke was a very kind and generous man. He had a tremendous sense of humour. He came from a very loving and fun-loving family, and he was always playing jokes and laughing and just being around people, which is what he loved. His passion in life was scuba diving, and everything he did was geared at when the next dive was, or when the next pool session was, or that's what he lived for.
Yeah. When did you notice that things weren't quite right or he was starting to feel unwell?
Steve had been ill for a little while. He'd had some surgery before I met him at the early 90s, and then in 2014 he had an emergency operation where they removed most of his intestines. He was only left with 0.7 of a metre of bowel.
Wow.
Most men have got 8.4 metres. And it changed our lives completely, and it stopped him diving, which was his biggest regret about the whole thing. But as we got towards the end, his pain was increasing, and he was finding it difficult to eat. And pain management was what we needed.
And what diagnosis was he given, Sarah?
Okay, so when he had the surgery in 2014, he had neuroendocrine tumour in his aorta and his mesenteric layer of something, I don't know. And in the surgery, they were able to remove quite a lot of the tumour, but not the part that was in his aorta. So we knew it was slow growing, and we knew it wasn't going to go anywhere, and we sort of hoped that it would sit around forever. And we had some horrible treatments, even going up to the chemo and radiotherapy weren't suitable for that kind of tumour, and we went up to Guy's Hospital in London for some nuclear therapy, which was pretty horrible. PRRT, I think, were the initials. And that was putting nuclear stuff in your body is not a pleasant experience.
No.
So there wasn't any treatment as such. It was just a managing the symptoms and trying to keep him eating as much as we could to keep the weight on.
And initially you tried to care for him at home and stay at home as long as possible. Was it quite hard to accept that you needed extra support?
It was very hard, but the first sort of indication that we should perhaps try Forest Home was all about pain management. I have to confess I'd heard of hospices, but I hadn't got a clue what they did.
Yeah.
And what they were for. I kind of know a little bit more now that your length of stay, if it's 2 weeks, is probably you've gone in too soon. And we went in for pain management, and honestly, angels in nurses' uniforms is what I would say about the Forest Home staff. They were wonderful. They explained his symptoms. He had some different kind of pain relief on pumps and all sorts of things. But the kindness and the atmosphere in the place. I don't know if you remember, back in 2018, there was a lady in there, and they brought her horse in to say goodbye.
Yes, yeah.
That was just a beautiful moment, and we witnessed it all.
Oh.
And it was just very special. So we were there for pain management, and we got the pain back under control, and he wanted to come home for the weekend. And we were promised that, well, if you go home for the weekend, we'll keep your bed just in case. Because obviously when you're not familiar with what's going on, you always think you've got another day. But those wonderful people around us obviously knew, and were very gentle with how they looked after us, both of us. So we went home for the weekend, and it soon became very apparent that, I couldn't cope, because I didn't know what to do, and the treatment that he was having wasn't a regular treatment, and the district nurse that came in wasn't really confident in whatever it was he needed. But I was on the end of the phone for Forest Holme, and they talked us through it, and they encouraged us to come back in, which for me was a massive great relief, because I knew that he was comfortable and being properly cared for, which I couldn't really do at home.
And what were those final days or moments like?
Oh gosh, it was very traumatic but very peaceful. It was a very hot time of year, like it is now in August, and we had all the windows and doors open, and the fountains in the courtyard, and the care of washing and moving and whatever, all of those things that he needed were managed very sensitively. Reverend Fraser Smith came in several times for a chat, probably more comforting for me, and certainly helped me a lot with what happened afterwards. But for me it was a peaceful, very peaceful, without going into too much of the detail, I thought he had a very peaceful and wonderful death. I spoke to some people through the bereavement section of Forest Holme who'd had experiences of death during COVID, and it made me appreciate how lucky we were that we had that time together, and I was holding his hand and helped him go.
Yeah.
So
I hope that you are finding this episode useful. Perhaps you have a question you'd like to ask. You can do this by commenting below. Your input shapes the conversations we have and the topics that we explore. So don't hesitate to reach out and let us know what you'd like to hear more of. And you've said previously that you didn't want him to go into a hospice. What preconceptions did you have about hospice care?
I had no idea. I mean, I think people sort of want to die at home because they've been in hospitals, and hospitals are very impersonal places. I mean, they're doing a wonderful job, but a hospice is just a different kind of atmosphere. It's a different kind of people. They've got all the time in the world for everything you need, and they know how to deal with what's going to happen. So even though I didn't know, they had everything. After he had breathed his last, they had everything that I needed to hand and could tell me what I needed to do. I think if Steve had died at home, and I'd had to go into the bedroom and see that space, I would have found that very, very difficult. If I'd have had to sit with him while people came and whatever, if he'd died at home, that would have been traumatic. I used to have a little tear in my eye driving past the end of Seldown Road for a few years after, just imagining what it was like. Yeah.
Yeah. And what would you say to someone else that may be fearful about going into a hospice, or their loved ones might be scared?
I would say exactly what somebody said to me when they heard that we were going to go in there. She said, "You can go back to being husband and wife instead of patient and carer."
Yeah.
And that is the honest truth, because you can't. I did a lot. I wasn't born to be Sarah the carer. During the 4 years of illness, I did things I never thought I could do, with sterilising drips and injections, and I'm very squeamish. But you can't do it all 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
When somebody needs that sort of professional care. The angels in uniform, the nurses in Forest Holme are just so professional with what they do. They see it all the time. And I know from the connection that I had, next week it's 6 years since Steve passed. And the faces of the people are still familiar. I don't know all the names. They're people who are long-term in that role because they understand it and they know how to deal with patients and family. And after you've lost a loved one, a lot of people think you just carry on and don't want to talk about it, and you just have a stiff upper lip and that's it, you get on with it. But you really don't. And the help and the support that you get from a community like Forest Holme is invaluable.
And shortly after Steve sadly passed away, you gave up alcohol for 3 months, which is something you promised Steve that you would do, and turned it into a bit of a fundraiser. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes. It was a bit of a crutch while he was poorly. Proud to say I'm not drinking now, but for those 3 months after I lost him, the weekend after he died, I went to a hen party. Not the best thing to do when you've just lost your husband, but you know, the marriage was going ahead, and it was the daughter-in-law of a dear friend. And the following morning I woke up with a dreadful hangover. It was the 12th of August, and I set up a fundraising page to raise £250, saying I'd promised Steve that I'd do this for 3 months. By 7:10 in the morning, I'd raised £100, and I went on to raise for Steve and for Forest Holme about 2,500 over the 3 months, and it was the best thing I could have done. I couldn't have coped with all of that strangeness and pain. The pain is phenomenal. If I'd have been using alcohol as a crutch. So I'm very grateful that I made that promise. Unfortunately, the 3 months on the 12th of November was up the day before my 60th birthday, so at least I could celebrate that in style. But I was proud that he'd suggested I do it. I don't think he suggested. I think he said he was worried about it, and I said, "Don't worry, I'm just going to give up." And I was proud to be able to do something to raise some money for Forest Holme.
That's amazing, and thank you for giving back, especially at such a difficult time as well. So thank you for chatting to me today, and thank you for listening to the Life and Loss podcast. If you'd like more information on our work, you can visit our charity website, which is foresthomehospice.org.uk. If you found this episode useful, click the subscribe button. Share this episode with a friend or loved one, and don't forget to give us a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support means so much.